Hi, welcome to the Lead with Levity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Walker, and this episode is for you if you've ever been in a situation where you looked at a person, any person, looked at a person, and they had a tendency to maybe rub people the wrong way. They said things that were just aggressive, or their approach was just rough around the edges, and you look upon them and say, wow. How have they made it this far in life without correcting some of these behaviors, without the feedback? Have they received any feedback on this? And, this is something I hear like every week. Someone is telling me about someone in their lives who has a lack of self-awareness, who is struggling to connect with others, who does not even see how their behavior is affecting others. And then they'll say something like, oh, they have low EQ. So if you are wondering about emotional intelligence, how you can improve it and build it up in your own self, or how you can help others, how you can kind of learn more about this concept so that you can be more effective with others, then this episode is actually for you. We have Dr. Stein. He is a world-renowned clinical psychologist and international best-selling author. His focus is on emotional intelligence and hardiness. And he's got some pretty cool stuff in his background. He's done work with the Canadian Forces, with the U.S. Air Force, with the FBI, with American Express, and he is that psychologist that is working behind the scenes of reality TV shows. So when you think about how did they pick these people? Where did they find them? How are they going to be okay after this show? How are we supporting them during the show? I don't think they're okay. All of that. He's one of those psychologists who works behind the scenes to help support the people that they select, how they support them through the process, and even after they leave, making sure that they're okay after they leave. So we're going to dive into all of these things, and the scenario for today, the realistic scenario that we're gonna pick Dr. Stein's brain on, is one where we have a manager who uses religious beliefs as justification for excluding people at work, right? And really saying diversity, equity, inclusion, no, that's against my religious beliefs. So I can't wait to see what Dr. Stein is going to say about this. And I'm looking forward to sharing this episode with you as well. I hope you enjoy it.
It's time for a sneak peek. Sneak peek, sneak peek.
Learn how to manage these 3 C's. And the first one is commitment. That means they have a purpose in life, a purpose in what they're doing, whether they believe in God, whether they believe in their country. There's something bigger than them. They could even be spiritual, but they believe in something that kind of guides them in the long term, that keeps them motivated. The second C is called challenge. And what that involves is when change happens or some stressful event happens, you're able to think of it in a different way. It's a different mindset. You see it as a challenge. You sort of step back and say, and look at it as a puzzle, or maybe even ask a friend of yours, or if you were advising a friend, how would you deal with that situation? So you're able to sort of step back and look at it as more of a challenge than a problem or a difficulty. And the third one is control. And what that's all about is learning how to manage what you can control and not waste your time spinning your wheels on things that you can't control. So working with, for example, high-level professional tennis players, they can't control the weather if it's an outdoor match. They can't control who their opponent is, who could be a very nasty person. So there's a lot of things that are not in their control, but they learn how to focus on what they can control. They can control the way they hit the ball. They can control how they move, where they stand. So all your focus is on the areas that you have control over and not spend your time or energy worrying on things you have no control over.
And now, on with the show.
When you're feeling the pressure, take a moment to step back, pick up your marbles, and choose to lead with levity. Join us on the Lead with Levity podcast for fireside chats that will fill your bucket and help you get back to being the leader you were meant to be. Now here's your host, Dr. Heather Walker.
Welcome back to the Lead with Levity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Walker, and I have the pleasure of introducing our next guest, Dr. Stein. He is a world-renowned clinical psychologist, international best-selling author. In fact, he is the leading expert in psychological assessment and emotional intelligence. He's consulted with the military, with government, with corporate organizations, even with TV shows. So, the U.S. Air Force, the Canadian Forces, the American Express, which is not a force of, it is a force to be reckoned with, but it's not a government force, professional sports teams. And he's provided expertise, as I mentioned before, for TV shows like Big Brother Canada, The Amazing Race Canada, and MasterChef Canada. So that's pretty cool. Hopefully we'll get to kind of dig into that a little bit. I'd love to hear about your experiences. And you can pick up one of his many books on Hardiness, making stress work for you to achieve your life goals. Or if you're interested in EQ, Dr. Stein has written a lot on EQ. He's got the EQ Edge, Emotional Intelligence in Your Success, the EQ Leader, Emotional Intelligence for Dummies. I will pick up Emotional Intelligence for Dummies. And also, one thing that is very cool about Dr. Stein, y'all, is he's the founder and executive chair of Multi Health Systems. It is an organization that publishes scientifically validated assessments, and they're recognized as one of Canada's best managed companies. So we have a lot to learn from Dr. Stein and his experience today. Welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Heather. Wow, thanks for that glowing introduction.
There's so much. I cut out so much from your bio that I really wish that I could share. And it will be in the show notes. So I'm glad that we will be able to share all of the wonderful experiences that you bring to the table. Now, you're in Canada, and I'm going to ask you a silly question. What is your favorite food that is a food that's very specific to Canada?
Well, there aren't a lot of foods that are specific to Canada. I guess one might be beaver tails, which is a sort of donut. And another might be that you might be more familiar with is poutine. Those chips or French fries with a lot of cheese on them.
Gravy?
Gravy. But that's more Quebecois. That's from the province next door to us. So I'd have to go with beaver tails. When we were just in New Orleans, they had beignets. So our version is beaver tails.
Ooh, okay. Beaver tails. I'm so glad that you explained that, because I thought you meant literal beaver tails for a minute there.
No, nothing like that. No.
Okay. So does it look like a bear claw, or what does it look like?
It looks like a long kind of donut with ridges and a lot of sugar on it.
Okay. Powdered or
Yeah,
glazed?
I don't know if it's powdered. It's sugar.
Okay. You can tell a lot about a person by their donut choices, by the way.
Well, I don't eat as many as I'd like to, so I've been cutting back on the donuts.
That's smart. That's very, very smart. So, Dr. Stein, you've been focusing your career on helping people get better and better about how they connect with themselves and with others. EQ is something I remember, maybe it was like 5 years ago or something. That was the big buzzword. Everyone known to man was like, how can we improve our EQ? Our managers need more EQ. And they were just throwing this around, right?
Right.
How did you get into this?
We got into it about 25 years ago when nobody even heard of it or knew what it was. And basically, I started off as a traditional psychologist working with children and families on the mental health side. So dealing with things like ADHD, depression, anxiety, all those
Mm.
areas of mental health. But at some point, it sort of struck me that, we got to start looking at what's right with people. We know a lot about what's not right with people and trying to fix that. But we also want to see what makes people excel, what makes people really successful at what they do. So at that point, we came across some research that started to look at that. And it was basically around what was starting to be called emotional intelligence back in the early 1990s. And we started to focus on that. What makes people great? What makes people succeed? And as part of that, I want to look at people in all walks of life. So, on the one hand, you have people who are successful CEOs, athletes, people in entertainment. But on the other hand, we want to study people who were not doing well, people with chronic diseases, people who were homeless, people who were suffering through traumas. So we wanted to look at what worked across the board, things that could really apply to people at whatever stage of life they were in. And that became
Ooh.
emotional intelligence.
Okay, so can you maybe describe to us, for especially our listeners who are just tuning in, from your perspective, when you're differentiating between those groups that have that mental health, mental wellness, mental wealth versus groups that are maybe perhaps not thriving, and emotional intelligence is something that you're saying differentiates them. What is emotional intelligence?
Okay, so there's a number of definitions that have come around since we started doing this work, but we've been pretty consistent over the last 20 odd years. And in terms of our research supporting that, it would be generally five areas that we include. So one is self-perception, how you see yourself, your ability to be aware of your own emotions at both a micro level, like right now I'm feeling a little anxious, or I'm really happy to be talking to you, Heather. So being aware of those emotions, and at a big level, am I happy with my job? Am I happy with my life? Am I happy with my family? So from the micro to the macro, being really
Mm.
aware of yourself and where you're coming from. Then the second level is our ability to express ourselves, especially when we work with leaders. Some leaders, especially if they come through a technology lens, are not always very expressive with people, right? They're used to being more, insular, isolated. So your ability to really tell people, be transparent, what do I feel? What do I think? Being authentic is the second area. The third area we call interpersonal skills. That's ability to get along with people, to initiate relationships, maintain relationships, really do well with others. And we find that leaders who are strong in those interpersonal skills manage to be more successful in their ability to get other people to want to follow them and do the things they need to have done. The
Mm.
fourth level is what we call decision making. And decision making at whatever level we do it involves emotion. Even though some people try and deny that and become full logical and rational, the reality is the best decisions are made when you use your intuition or some of your emotion is involved in that decision. And we have a lot of research on that with everything from stockbrokers to people, salespeople, in terms of the importance of emotion in decision making. And finally, the ability to manage stress. People high in emotional intelligence are really good at their ability to deal with or manage stress. So those five areas encapsulate the model. We call it the EQI, emotional quotient. It's measured by the emotional quotient inventory 2.0 model.
Very cool. And I know that EQ is something that you can cultivate, you can develop, you can grow, you can learn. Let me ask you some basic questions.
Mhm.
Is there a genetic component to it? Do some of us come into this world with more EQ than others?
I think there are people who do have that more of a natural tendency. We look at people, well, Oprah Winfrey is a good example. She comes at it pretty naturally. She has a way that really wins over people. And there are others you can think of. One example that used to be given a lot was Bill Clinton, his ability
Mm.
to sort of listen to people, understand where they're coming from, and focus on them really well. So there are some people who have it as, I guess you call it a super skill in their ability to do it. But the good news about it is that it can be learned to a large degree.
Yes, yes. And one thing that I've been wondering as a consultant, I don't typically go in and teach people how to improve their EQ skills. And so I see consultants who do, as, wow, you have a cape on, you are doing good work out there, go you. Obviously, you want to start with some type of an assessment to see where you're at so that you can track your progress, maybe even collecting feedback from others. And you've got this EQ quotient to do that. But what have you seen to be really, really beneficial for people who are trying to get better and better about how they connect with themselves and others?
Well, one of the amazing things that we saw from early on was people not only doing better at work, whether they're in a leadership role or a subordinate role, getting along better with the people around them, but also we've seen it spill over into their family lives. It's amazing how many people sort of report to me after, wow, I learned these skills at work in the office, but now I'm using them with my teenage daughter, who I wasn't really getting along with really well. But this has allowed me to be, at least to listen to her more, to feel I'm understanding her more, and we can have more of a relationship than we had before. So it's amazing how many stories I hear of the spillover of these skills into other domains apart from just the workplace.
Yes, yes. And I would completely agree there. What kind of practical strategies can someone try to get better?
Well, there's a number of directions you can go, but one of the ones I like
Mm-hmm.
to start with, which is really an important skill when you get it right, is empathy. And what you got to do there is really pay more attention, listen to people, and try and focus on where they're really coming from. So when we
Mm.
start off, Heather, you said, "How are you today? How was your day?" It was one of your first questions to me. And I could have said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, it was just fine." And then you would probably look at me and say, "Really?" There's something beyond the words that you're giving me. You
Mm.
might have been struggling with something today. So it's that ability to read what's really going on in people and to address it in a constructive way. But I think the first step is, which you're asking about, is to learn how to pay attention to what's going on with other people, not to jump in with
Mm.
solutions or other things, just to focus on it. So when you tell me, Heather, you're feeling good, I say, really, what makes you feel good today? Like to really try and get at it and to make sure I understand where you're really coming from. That's a really important skill and can help you in a lot of ways.
Are you seeing any specific gaps in where leaders are maybe focusing their attention or yeah, I'll stop there. Focusing their attention because I agree that, being able to pay attention and really see the person in front of you, not just what they're telling you, but are they looking down? Are they animated? Are they expanding on what they have to say?
Hmm.
Paying attention to some of those cues in the pace of life that we're in right now. I don't know about you, but I've noticed that is something that is becoming this rare gift, this rare skill, because people are just so focused on their phones or whatever other work they have to do. They're trying to multitask and get things done. And they don't realize just how much they're missing. They think they're knocking all kinds of stuff out. Like, I'm so productive right now, but they don't realize they're missing something really critical in their relationships by doing this.
It's
So,
100%. Yeah, you got it, Heather. That's exactly what's happening. We're trying to multitask, pay attention to different things, and we're not focusing on the person right in front of us. And in terms of leaders, you asked sort of what the gap is. And one of the big things there is leaders just want to rush in and tell you what the 5-year plan and here's how we're going to do it, and on and
mm,
on and on and on. As opposed to sort of listening to people. And, it doesn't mean you have to accept everything they say, but at least people want to be heard. So if they say, are you taking this into account in the 5-year plan or whatever you're going forward with, and just showing that you're paying attention to where everyone else is coming from, that can pay you a lot of dividends in the long run.
mm, mm. Are there any other blind spots that you see that are just when it comes to EQ, any other sort of major blind spots outside of just not paying attention?
Yeah, the other self-awareness. And again, a lot of the research we've done with leaders shows how important it is to be aware. When I want to convey something to you or ask you to do something, and I'm having a
Mm-hmm.
pretty rotten day, someone just cut me off on the highway on my way to work and I'm still angry about it, that anger may spill over to the instruction or conversation with you. Now, that anger has nothing to do with you. I just arrived. We just sort of got together. And a lot of leaders who are not emotionally intelligent really don't pay attention to that. Instead of sort of stopping and saying, okay, I've got this issue, I'm feeling angry, but it has nothing to do with my interaction with Heather. So let me just put that anger aside and let me start fresh. And Heather, how was your day today? Mine wasn't great, but whatever. So that
Mm-hmm.
ability to be aware of your own emotions, because your emotions influence or affect other people. And in fact,
Yeah.
what we found in the research is the emotions of the leader are often contagious. So if you have a leader who's a tyrant or who's always sad or pessimistic about, oh, we're never going to make the sales this month, that spills over to everybody in the organization.
Yes, it does. Amen. So, this lack of self-awareness is something that I hear again and again and again. What I find challenging about this, though, is the person who is not aware is also not the person who is going and seeking awareness. They're
Right.
not, they don't know that they're not aware.
Yeah,
They don't
that's
know that they're missing these things until maybe someone complains.
Yeah, that's really good point. And we see that a lot, especially when it's someone who's in a leadership role and you don't know how to approach it. And it's clear to everyone else but that person that they're not aware.
Hmm.
So there's a number of ways to go about it. I guess there's informal and formal ways. Informally, you may want to say, did you ever notice that when you ask Mary to do something, she sort of is a bit reluctant to do that? Or when you want to get something done through a number of other people, it just doesn't happen. So just bringing their attention
Mm,
to the fact that they're not achieving their goals in some way. And maybe there's
mm,
something getting in the way of that. And you have to get them, motivated to want to listen to you. And then you can sort of slide into, well, I noticed that when you asked Mary to do that, you were kind of angry in your voice, or you were sort of giving her orders, and people don't like to be spoken to that way. There's a sort of a gentle way. So that's kind of an informal way that you can maybe get at someone. What we often get involved in is the more formal way. So we use a
mhm,
tool like the EQI 2.0, and we use a 360 version so that all the people who work around that leader report on how they see their behavior. And that's a real eye opener for a lot of leaders, that you got to really know how to give that feedback to the leader, showing, hey, you think you're really empathic, but a lot of people around you don't see it that way. Maybe we could sort of
mhm.
explore how you see yourself versus how they might be seeing you.
Yes, yes. And this is just something I've wondered for a long time. Do you find that leaders get offended when you tell them that they have low EQ?
Some of them do. In fact, my newer book, Emotional Intelligence for Dummies, someone at a recent conference came and asked me, wow, this is great. You think I should give this to my boss? I said, no, that might not be a good idea. You don't want to give
It's
them a
going to get you
dummies
in
book
trouble.
showing that, get you in trouble. But there are things in there that you can learn that can help you approach your boss. You're right, there are some people who don't take it well. I remember being on a radio interview when I was in Ireland, and they were telling me how these terrible tyrant of bosses were so successful, getting everything
Mm,
done, keeping everybody in line. And I remember telling him, I said, that's great when the economy's bad and people don't have other jobs to go to, but you wait till the economy picks up and people decide they have a choice. They're not going to stay there for
mm-hmm.
very long. A lot of that talent is going to be lost.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. So this is all really good. And I'm curious, how does this connect to your work on TV shows? Because you are that psychologist. And I love to watch a good reality show. I really do. That's like my guilty pleasure. After we put our daughter to bed and everything, we're like, all right, we're watching 90 Day Fiance, or we're watching this, or we're watching that. And you are that expert who comes on and gives that advice, or maybe you provide that advice before the show even starts. What does that look like? Can you give us a peek into the behind the scenes of that?
Well, the role is sort of multifaceted. So the first role I play is in the casting aspect. So
Mm.
what we do is we screen everyone. We really want the shows, at least the ones that I work on, we want them to be safe. We want them to be a safe environment, and we don't want people to be on there who really shouldn't be. It could be harmful, if they may be
Mm-hmm.
suicidal or have some, difficult mental health issues. We don't want
Yeah.
them to be on that show, really. So that's the first aspect is safety. And that's what the insurance companies want to know from the networks and the TV production agencies. Secondly, it's more about finding the characteristics of the individual because, casting one of these shows I compare it sometimes to casting a Broadway play. We want different
Mm.
characters. We want to know what are their strengths, what are their challenges, how are these people going to interact together. So part of it is I give producers update on the different personality types that we're putting in there. Sometimes they want a villain, that if you've watched the shows, sometimes they want somebody who's authentic and honest. Sometimes they want somebody
Mm-hmm.
who's easily insulted. So they have all these different
Yes.
characters that make a show interesting. So a lot of my work involves around that. I screen them all, I interview them all. I'm there on set when there are issues or things happen, people
Mm.
get extremely upset. And I often do feedback interviews at the end when people leave, sort of discharge interviews. When the show's over, make sure they're okay, the experience was a good one, and get them ready to go out into life. They have to prepare because there may be a lot of social media and some of it's not very pretty sometimes. So I have to prepare them for managing the social media that may be happening around their character, around the person. And sometimes I do follow-ups with them just to see how they're going and was life going the way they thought. Or sometimes people come in with really high expectations. They think they're going to be,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, the next Kim Kardashian or whatever from being on one show. And that often does
Yes.
not happen. Exactly. So the role,
Really?
yeah, really, yeah. So the role takes on a number of interesting sort of twists and turns, and I have a great time doing that. And I've done, I don't know, probably 100 different shows. I mean, it's just a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. So I love this because oftentimes people will sort of look upon influencers and people who are on these shows in some different ways. But yeah, sometimes you look at this and it's like, well, now the rest of their life is set because they've been on this show. When in reality, they may not even make very much money at all uh, from being there, and they're getting all of this extra stress that they didn't even realize that they were signing up for.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the fame maybe lasts for 2 months, maybe 2 or 3 months. They can take advantage
Mm.
of it. They can go to a local bar and they'll get paid free drinks and maybe a couple $100 to attract people. But yeah,
Yeah.
that sometimes happens. The other
Oh,
really neat
wow.
thing about it, kind of my research psychologist background, is when we use tools like the EQI or the Hardiness tool, it gets us to see in real time how well our instruments perform. In the workplace, it may
Mm.
take months till you really find out what a person's like. But here I can
That's
do it in
true.
10 weeks. I've got a winner, I've got people eliminated. So I get to see the performance of our tools within a brief time frame, maybe 7 or 8 or 10 weeks. And it helps us sharpen our tools. Are we really predicting things? This person won, they had these great interpersonal skills, or what led to the success of one person versus the failure of another person?
Mm. What has been maybe the most surprising thing about supporting a reality TV show?
I think one of the surprising things is the strength that some people have coming out. Everyone has assumptions about reality TV, what's real,
Mm-hmm.
what's fake. Real are the emotions because you wouldn't watch it if those were fake. And I liken it in order to get a sort of better understanding of what goes on. If you're old enough to remember a show called Candid Camera way back in the end, I sort of do a trajectory of TV. And what we found there, the whole thing was about setting up a situation where someone's embarrassed or something funny happens. And it was all about their reaction. That's what made it so watchable. That's why everybody saw it. And then I worked on some of the scare shows. So you think of scare tactics in those shows. And again, it's
Oh.
putting people in a situation where they react, right, to what's going on. And you watch it, it's like, when you're on the highway and you see an accident across the lane, all the cars stop to see what's going on. Well, reality TV is kind of like that. So we get some real reactions to the situations that we set up. But what I find amazing in answer to your question is because when I do the post interviews with people, especially on really stressful shows like Amazing Race or Big Brother
Hmm.
Canada, they've been through a lot. They've been through a lot of stress and strain, and they come out. And one of my questions is always, did you learn anything about yourself and your ability to deal with things? And some of the answers are amazing. What people come out of there with their ability to
Mm,
deal with people who are completely different from themselves, people they never would have encountered in real life, right? And what they learned
hmm.
about how they normally used to react to that kind of a person, and now how they've learned about that kind of a person and are really open and welcoming and just change their whole view of people and dealing with people and their own reactions to people. I find that pretty amazing.
Wow. Yes. And there's research to support that as well. When we open ourselves up to new experiences, new cultures, it increases our worldview, it increases our comfort level with those things. So, yeah, that
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense. And I'm wondering, you mentioned that a lot of them come out with sort of this strength, this inner strength, which reminds me a little bit about your work on hardiness. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So Hardiness is my newest book. I've written my co-author, Paul Bartone, who's a retired colonel, U.S. Army, West Point. And a lot of the research, it's really a lot of it's based on his research. He's spent over 20 years of his career studying what makes people succeed through stressful situations. Everything from
Mm,
combat soldiers to veterans, all sorts of military leaders at West Point. And his work involved this concept of hardiness, which is really three C's that make up hardiness. What they found is that people who undergo or not just bounce back from stress, but are stronger after a stressful experience, learn how to manage these three C's. And the first one is commitment. That means they have a purpose in life, a purpose in what they're doing, whether they believe in God, whether they believe in their country. There's something bigger than them. They could even be spiritual, but they believe in something that kind of guides them in the long term, that keeps them motivated.
mm,
The second C is called challenge. And what that involves is when change happens or some stressful event happens, you're able to think of it in a different way. It's a different mindset. You see it as a challenge. You sort of step back and say and look at it as a puzzle. Or maybe even ask a friend of yours, or if you were advising a friend, how would you deal with that situation? So you're able to
hmm.
sort of step back and look at it as more of a challenge than a problem or a difficulty. And the third one is control. And what that's all about is learning how to manage what you can control and not waste your time spinning your wheels on things that you can't control. So, working with, for
Mm,
example, high level professional tennis players, they can't control the weather if it's an outdoor match. They can't control who their opponent is, who could be a very nasty person. So, there's a lot of things that are not in their control, but they learn how to focus on what they can control. They can control the way they hit the ball. They can control how they move, where they stand. So all your focus is on the areas that you have control over and not spend your time or energy worrying on things you have no control over.
mm. I've been thinking more and more about this lately, and the ability to kind of hold what you're focusing on, the challenge at arm's length, and to say, you know what, I have only so much energy to devote to whatever it is today. If I spend all of my energy focusing on this, working on this, continuing to beat my head on that and hitting the wall, I'm not going to have any energy to move forward on the things that are really important to me. And maybe this is really important to you, but if you can't control what someone else thinks about you, or the reaction that someone has, or what they're doing or not doing, then that's something that I think it's worth looking at. Where are you spending your energy? And are you spending it on those things that are going to move you forward, those things that you can have a little bit more influence over, or those things that are just continuing to show up as obstacles for you?
So, Heather, you're answering one of the most asked questions I get, which is what's the difference between grit and hardiness? And you just answered it. People who are high on grit do that. They focus on something, even though they may not win. I'll focus on
Mm.
being a concert pianist and spend 10,000 hours trying to do that, to be that. But I'm never going to make it to that level of that skill. So with hardiness, exactly what you said, you sort of step back and say, well, maybe I can teach music, or maybe I can be a songwriter, or, maybe
Ooh.
I can work in a music studio and be a studio musician, instead of just pushing and pushing for something you're not going to accomplish. And that's grit versus hardiness. And some of Paul's research validated that at West Point. The leaders who were stronger in hardiness tended to do better. They were able to stick with it longer because they focused on what was important and didn't burn themselves out trying to be something that wasn't as important.
Okay, so what's the difference between hardiness and resilience then?
Well, we like to think of resilience as kind of having a setback and then
Mm-hmm.
eventually moving back to where you were.
Ah,
With
gotcha, gotcha.
hardiness, we see people who really develop these three C's during that time of difficulty, getting through it, come out even stronger than they were before the initial event. So hardiness builds your strength. It's like building your muscle. It's like going to the gym and working out. So hardiness is a strength builder.
Hmm. That's that's interesting. Let me see if we can apply some of these concepts that we've been talking about. Hardiness, emotional intelligence, how you're thinking about yourself with self-awareness and raising your awareness to a very real workplace scenario. I've actually experienced this scenario multiple times
Right.
uh, in my work in HR. There's always someone somewhere. So here's the scenario. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. So we have Chewy. Chewy is a manager who sometimes uses their religious beliefs to explain why they don't fully support inclusive leadership principles. So, in discussions about workplace diversity and inclusion, whenever those conversations start to come up, Chewy might say things like, well, my faith teaches me that certain lifestyles are not in line with our values, or I believe we should focus on our common goals rather than emphasizing our differences. So, Chewy, that's Chewy, and Chewy is not wrong, but also I think from an inclusion standpoint and thinking about the kind of environment that Chewy's creating, what could we potentially apply to this situation?
So I think there's two things here. One is Chewy not wanting to accept some of those other lifestyles. And you can say, Chewy, that's fair. I mean, they may not
Mm-hmm.
apply to you, that may not fit with your religious beliefs. But on the other hand, there's understanding those lifestyles. And that doesn't mean you have to accept them. That just
Right.
means that you're learning about them or knowing about them. And, maybe you can accept that other people have those lifestyles. That doesn't mean that you're changing your belief or altering it, right? So I
Yeah.
think it's a matter of understanding that the world is made up of different people and we all have our own beliefs and ways of doing things. And we don't have to give up any of that. However, you may learn a lot by understanding what other people's beliefs are. So why don't we just try seeing if you could learn a little bit about each person on your team? Doesn't mean you have to buy into it, but just so that you're aware of where they're coming from. And that might make you even a stronger and better person.
And how does that connect to your EQ model?
So in EQ, we talk about empathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ability to listen and understand what's happening. Doesn't mean I accept it. I don't have to buy into it, but at least I know where you're coming from and I can appreciate it. So when I make a request and you don't agree with it, at least I can see instead of dismissing you or getting angry at you, I could say, well, that may be a reason that doesn't go over very well, right? We have different
Mm-hmm.
ideas or beliefs and things, and then we can start to work around that.
Yes, yes. So if you have a workplace that is incredibly diverse and you are automatically excluding half of the population,
Yeah.
how effective can you be?
You can, yeah. I mean, and that's the other part of it. You can say to her, and to be an effective leader, it's really important that you take into account all the people on the team, that you not exclude people. And again, you have to emphasize this does not mean that you believe what they believe or you're accepting their beliefs as yours. It just means that you understand them and you know where they're coming from.
Mm. So I almost called you Chewy. Dr. Stein, in your own personal journey, to becoming a hardier, high EQ person out there in the world, what has that journey been like for you? And what has helped you along the way?
Well, I think part of it is what I often talk about mindset is kind of approaching the world as a psychologist, where we're always experimenting. Even the reality shows, when I'm with the cast and the crew, we talk about a social experiment. And I guess you could say
Mm,
I sort of treat life like a social experiment. We try things, they may not work. We try something else, maybe it does work. And a number of facets of my life, I've been able to do that. Like I have a company that my wife and I started, the two of us, and it now has over 200 people. So, but I'm
mm.
not a business person, right? I never took a business course in my life. I'm a
Wow.
psychologist. So that sometimes that's antithetical to business. But we use principles of psychology. It's trial and error and learning from your mistakes. And I think that's contributed a lot to where we've gotten today. The fact that we've been able to try things, we fail. I know I fail at certain things. I accept that, but I can move on. I keep going forward. So making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, taking risks, not being afraid of risks, as long as they're safe risks, they're not going to hurt you in any way. I think those are the things that have helped me along the way in terms of getting to where things are today. And, things are great. I mean, we have a great company, we have great people, we have great engagement, everybody's involved, and people sort of love to work with us because we care about the people. I mean, it's always since day one. I mean, we started in a basement, in a kitchen, and food has always been a part of our culture. And it is to this day when people come back to the office, it's always
Hmm.
often around food and everyone gets to chat and talk. And I think that's really important. And the other, I guess, key word that I use is respect, that the fact that we respect everyone wherever they are in the organization.
Oh, that is so good. And I can definitely see that you, at no point did you say, "This is good. I'm done. I've
No.
hit the pinnacle of where I should be in life, and I am not going to grow anymore. I'm not going to learn anything new." And that's where sometimes those leaders who lack self-awareness or who score a little bit lower on EQ, maybe it's because they don't realize it, but they aren't growing anymore. They aren't learning new things and testing when it comes to interpersonal relationships.
So in the EQI, we call it self-actualization. The fact that we keep on learning and growing and doing things. It was kind of funny
Yeah.
we are on the set of one of the TV shows I work on, and it was the finale of the show, so everybody shows up for that. And the owner of the production company was there, and he's a very famous person in the industry. And how do I put this? He looks a little bit older than I do. So he was talking about his age, and I said, listen, you won't believe this, but I'm actually older than you. And he looked
Oh.
at shock. He said, really? And he says, why are you still working? He said, why are you doing this? I said, because I love this stuff. I love this.
Mm-hmm.
What could be more fun than working in entertainment and all the stuff that we do every day? And and he thought about it and he says, yeah, I guess that's why I'm still working too. I learn stuff every new show, every experience. We learn new stuff all the time. And I said, yeah, and that's why you and I aren't going to stop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's why you'll probably continue to look younger because you have that outlook.
I didn't want to say that to him. I might not get hired back.
Right, right. Well, we're not going to name names. So,
Right.
oh, that's good. So where does fun and levity come into play for you?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm a musician and I have a band. We play once a month at a local restaurant pub, and it's a kind of a jazz rock band modeled after Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But we do some
Wow.
Aretha Franklin. Actually, we did an Amy Winehouse tribute. My singer can do a real great Amy Winehouse. So I love music. I love performing. In fact, I just did a presentation at the ATD, and I close it with my band performing of a part, not the whole thing, but a section out of the song Respect that I'm sure you're familiar with, because I try and
Yes.
illustrate if you want to get engagement from the people in your organization, this is one of the ingredients you've got to have. And then we blast it on, and she does RESPEC, and then we do the whole thing. We got the whole sax section and the horns, and we're just blasting away. So that's my love,
Wow.
my passion. My other passion is music and doing performances.
Nice, nice. And we never would have known if if we didn't ask. Sometimes you got to go a little bit deeper, people, when you ask people questions so that you can get these jewels. Because Dr. Stein, I would not have imagined that you have this jazz rock band and you're out there still taking gigs and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that is so cool.
Yeah, it's a blast. I love it.
Yeah. So what's on the horizon for you?
Wow, that's a good question. At this point, it's more research, more performances. We're doing some new research on emotional intelligence, looking at how there's performance. We have a way of measuring actual performance as opposed to self-report, like how emotional intelligent you tend to think you are, or good at various skills you believe you are. So that's one of the things, and we're looking at how that compares to staff engagement, to what we call good citizenship behavior. Some people at work do above and beyond what's expected. And some people say, "Hey, I'm out of here. It's 4:59. I'm out of here. Leave me alone." So we're looking at what differentiates people from the emotional intelligence lens on those who sort of want to do more from those who want to do less, and
Ooh,
people's ability
yes.
to be passionate about their work. I think that's so important. So we're doing research. We're looking at new areas and playing new songs. So together, that's what we're doing.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. If anyone is interested in learning more about you and what you have to offer, your organization, all of that, where should they go?
They can go to stevenstein.com, or they can go to mhs.com, which is our company.
Perfect. Thank you. That was short, sweet, and to the point. Dr. Stein, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Heather. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lead with Levity podcast. To get resources mentioned in this episode and find out what we're all about, check us out at leadwithlevity.com.